Her name was Olivia. She was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. Kind, smart, funny. We met at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. I remember the exact moment she walked in, shaking the water from her umbrella. She laughed at herself as she fumbled with her order, and I couldn't help but smile. That laugh, it was the kind of sound that made you forget the world around you. I didn't talk to her that day, but fate had other plans. A week later, we bumped into each other again. This time at a bookstore. We reached for the same book. It sounds cliché, doesn't it? But in that moment, it felt like the universe was telling me, don't let her go. So I didn't. Our relationship grew quickly. What started with long conversations about life, dreams, and favorite books turned into late-night phone calls and weekend adventures. She made me feel alive, like I'd finally found the person who saw me for who I really was. Looking back, those early days feel like a dream. She had a way of making everything seem brighter. Her laugh, her touch, the way she'd scrunch her nose when she was annoyed but trying not to show it. For 3 years, we built a life together, brick by brick, moment by moment. I proposed to her on the same rainy afternoon, at the same coffee shop where I first saw her. She said yes before I even finished asking. We started planning our wedding almost immediately. It wasn't just a ceremony to us. It was the culmination of everything we had shared, everything we believed we were building. It felt unshakable, indestructible. But this story isn't just about Olivia. It's also about Mike. Mike was my best friend, my brother in all but blood. We met in college, two broke kids figuring out life. He was the guy who had my back when I struggled to pay rent, the one who pulled me out of bad breakups, the person I trusted more than anyone else. Mike and Olivia got along from the start. I was happy about that. You know, when you're with someone, you want them to love the people you love. And they did. Maybe a little too much, but I didn't see it at the time. I thought it was normal, even healthy. I encouraged it. Mike was there for every big moment in our relationship. He helped me pick out Olivia's engagement ring. He stood next to me when I got down on one knee. He was supposed to be my best man on my wedding day. In hindsight, I see how blind I was, how much trust one had placed in him, in both of them. There were moments, small ones, that should have raised questions. A glance between them that lasted a little too long. A joke that felt like it had an extra layer I wasn't in on. I shrugged it off. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, why would my best friend and my fiancé betray me? I loved them both. I trusted them both. And that trust was my greatest mistake. Everything felt perfect as the wedding approached. Olivia had found the perfect dress, a stunning white gown with lace details she couldn't stop talking about. Mike and I spent hours rehearsing the speeches we'd deliver at the reception. We joked about the old days, laughed about how far we'd come. I was happy, truly happy, but perfection is fragile. It doesn't take much to shatter it. A careless whisper, a stolen moment, a secret kept just a little too long. All it takes is one crack. And once that crack forms, it spreads, faster than you can stop it. The week before the wedding, I stood in our apartment, looking at the boxes of decorations we'd carefully packed, each one labeled, each detail planned. I felt this overwhelming sense of gratitude, that I was lucky enough to marry the woman I loved, with my best friend standing by my side. It felt like everything was exactly as it should be. And yet, as I stood there, a small thought crept into my mind. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling, a sense that something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was Olivia's sudden absences, her unexplained phone calls. Maybe it was the way Mike had been avoiding me lately, brushing off plans with flimsy excuses. But I ignored it. I told myself I was just overthinking, that wedding stress was getting to me. I had no idea that, within days, my perfect life would come crashing down, that the two people I trusted most were already pulling the strings, unraveling everything we had built. Looking back, I wonder if I ever really knew them, or if the version of Olivia and Mike I loved was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. And that lie was about to cost me everything. Before we continue, we notice that over 80% of our viewers haven't subscribed to this channel. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear more gripping tales like this, please support us by hitting the subscribe button and turning on notifications. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. The week before the wedding, I woke up feeling a sense of unease I couldn't shake. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. Olivia had been distant, distracted, her phone glued to her hand more than usual. Mike had been different, avoidant. He stopped making his usual jokes, started showing up late, or not at all. I kept telling myself it was wedding jitters. After all, it's a stressful time for everyone, right? But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then, one night, it all unraveled. Olivia was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. I trusted her. But this time, I couldn't look away. Something told me I needed to see what was on that screen. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the phone. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this wasn't who I was. But the buzzing wouldn't stop. Message after message lit up the screen. And finally, I picked it up. The first thing I saw was a name. Mike, my best friend, my brother. And beneath his name was a preview of a message. I can't wait to hold you again. My heart stopped. I opened the thread, and what I saw, it shattered me. Weeks of messages, plans to be together, things I can't even bring myself to repeat. They had been seeing each other for months, behind my back, lying to my face. And now, they were planning to leave together, to start a new life, without me. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled through message after message. They laughed about me, mocked my excitement for the wedding, called me blind, naive. I was nothing to them but an obstacle in their way. And to think, I loved them both. I wanted to scream, to cry, to smash that phone against the wall. But I didn't. I put it down, walked into the bathroom, and looked at her through the foggy glass of the shower door. She turned to me, smiled, completely unaware of what I had just discovered. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was something deeper, something darker. I walked out of the bathroom and sat in the darkened living room for hours, replaying every moment in my mind. Every kiss, every laugh, every time I had confided in Mike about how much I loved her, about how lucky I felt to have her in my life. And every time he had smiled back, pretending to be happy for me. It was all a lie. The next day, I called Mike. I wanted to hear his voice, to see if he would lie to me again. When he answered, he sounded normal, casual, like nothing had happened. I asked him to meet me for a drink, told him I needed advice about the wedding. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. That hesitation, it confirmed everything. He knew. He knew I was catching on. That evening, we sat across from each other at the bar. I watched him carefully, every expression, every word. He talked about the wedding, joked about the bachelor party he was supposed to throw for me. I could barely hear him over the sound of my own heartbeat. Finally, I looked him in the eye and asked him point blank, "Are you sleeping with Olivia?" He froze, just for a second, but that second was all I needed. His laugh was forced, his denial too quick. "What? No, man. What are you talking about?" But his eyes gave him away. They always say the eyes are the window to the soul. And in his, I saw fear, panic. I didn't press him. Not yet. I played it cool, finished my drink, and left. But the moment I got home, I confronted Olivia. I showed her the messages, laid them out on the table like evidence in a trial. At first, she denied it. She tried to tell me it wasn't what it looked like, that I was reading too much into it. But when I didn't back down, when I stood there waiting for the truth, she finally broke. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean for this to happen." She didn't mean for this to happen? Those words echoed in my mind. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't some mistake. It was a choice, a series of choices over and over again, to betray me, to betray us. She confessed everything. The late nights when she said she was working late, she was with him. The sudden trips to visit her sister, him again. Every lie, every excuse, it all unraveled in front of me like a thread pulled from a fraying sweater. I asked her why. Why him? Why now? Her answer was as cold as it was simple. "I fell out of love with you." That was it. No remorse, no regret. Just those 7 words. And with that, she walked out of the apartment, leaving me standing there, surrounded by the remnants of a life we had built together. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind raced with questions, memories, anger. I thought about Mike, about how he had looked me in the eye so many times and lied, about how Olivia had once promised me forever, only to tear it all apart. I thought about the wedding, about the guests who would show up expecting to celebrate our love. And I thought about revenge. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. They had taken everything from me, my love, my trust, my future. Now, it was my turn to take something from them. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end with me quietly walking away. They had made their choice, and now I was going to make mine. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about closure. It was about consequences. I started by gathering every piece of information I could. I went through Olivia's texts again, not just the ones with Mike, but with everyone. Her friends, her family, even her colleagues. I wasn't just looking for dirt. I was looking for patterns, for weak spots. People always leave breadcrumbs when they're hiding something. And Olivia had left a trail a mile wide. Mike was no different. For years, he'd been an open book to me, sharing every detail of his life. I knew where he worked, who he talked to, what he cared about. I knew his insecurities, his vulnerabilities, the things he didn't want the world to see. And now, I was going to use them all. I started small, testing the waters. Mike's job was the first target. He worked in sales, where reputation is everything. I created an anonymous email account and sent a detailed complaint to his boss, accusing him of stealing clients and sabotaging deals. It wasn't true, of course, but I made it believable enough to raise questions. Within days, he was called in for a meeting. He tried to deny it, but the seeds of doubt had already been planted. And Olivia, well, Olivia had always cared about her image. She prided herself on being the perfect daughter, the perfect friend, the perfect everything. So, I made sure her closest circle knew exactly who she really was. I sent screenshots of her messages with Mike to her parents, her friends, even her coworkers. I didn't hold back. The fallout was immediate. People she had known for years started questioning her. She tried to explain, to downplay it, but the damage was done. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to do more. I needed them to feel what I felt, to lose everything they valued, piece by piece. So, I waited. I watched. I let them think they had gotten away with it, that the worst was over. Then, I went after their relationship. Olivia and Mike thought they were untouchable, that their love was some kind of twisted victory. But love built on betrayal is fragile. It doesn't take much to break it. I created fake social media accounts and started planting doubts. Messages to Olivia from a fake woman claiming to be involved with Mike. Messages to Mike suggesting Olivia had been unfaithful, not just to me, but to him as well. At first, they ignored them. Then, they started fighting. Small arguments at first, then bigger ones. The cracks began to show. Still, it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed them to feel the weight of their actions in a way they couldn't ignore. That's when I decided to confront them, together. I planned it carefully. I knew they were meeting at Mike's apartment that night. I waited outside, sitting in my car, watching the light in his window. My hands were steady, my mind clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was calculated, deliberate. I knocked on the door. When Mike opened it, his face went pale. He tried to close it, but I forced my way inside. Olivia was there, sitting on the couch. She froze when she saw me, her expression a mix of fear and guilt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lash out. Instead, I looked them both in the eye and said, "Do you think I don't know? Do you think I'm just going to let you get away with this?" Mike tried to defend himself, stammering excuses that sounded hollow even to him. Olivia didn't say a word. She just sat there, staring at the floor. I didn't give them a chance to explain. I laid out everything I knew. Every lie, every betrayal, every disgusting detail of their affair. I told them how I had exposed them to everyone they cared about, how their reputations were already in ruins. They tried to deny it at first, but the weight of the truth was crushing. There was nowhere for them to hide. Then I told them what would happen next. I wasn't going to the police, I said. I wasn't going to drag this into the courts. No, this was between us now. They had destroyed my life, and it was only fair that I returned the favor. I left them that night, but my work wasn't done. Over the next few days, I made sure every aspect of their lives fell apart. Mike's apartment? I reported him to the landlord for hosting unauthorized guests and violating his lease. Olivia's workplace? I tipped off her boss about her unprofessional behavior, backed by fake screenshots of her personal conversations. They were spiraling, and I watched it all unfold with a cold satisfaction. Revenge is a strange thing. People think it's about anger, about striking back in the heat of the moment. But real revenge, it's patient. It's precise. It's the slow, methodical dismantling of someone's world, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but regret and ashes. And that's exactly what I gave them. They had taken everything from me. So, I made sure they knew what it felt like to lose everything, too. But even as their lives began to crumble, piece by piece, it didn't feel like enough. Not yet. The humiliation, the broken reputations, the lost opportunities. It was all satisfying in its own way, but it didn't touch the core of what they had taken from me. My trust, my peace, my future. That kind of pain demands something more. Something permanent. I didn't rush into it. No, I gave myself time to think, to plan, to make sure what I was about to do would leave no doubt in their minds that they had crossed the wrong person. I waited for the perfect opportunity, the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. It came one night, a little over a week after I confronted them. I knew they were still seeing each other. Despite everything, they clung to their relationship like it was some kind of twisted prize. They didn't know I was watching. They didn't know I was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. That night, I saw them leave Mike's apartment together. I followed. They drove out of the city, heading toward a cabin Mike's family owned by the lake. I remembered him talking about it years ago, how it was his place to escape from the world. Ironic, really, considering what he'd brought into my world. I knew they'd be alone out there, isolated, with no one to hear them. I waited until dark. The cabin was quiet, the only light coming from the windows. I could see them inside, laughing, talking like they didn't have a care in the world. It was infuriating. How easily they seemed to move on, how little they seemed to care about the destruction they'd left behind. But that would change soon enough. I slipped around the side of the cabin, careful not to make a sound. The woods were thick, the ground soft beneath my feet. I'd been preparing for this moment for days, rehearsing every step in my mind. I wasn't going to let emotions cloud my judgment. This was about precision, about control. I cut the power first. The cabin went dark, and I could hear their voices change, confused at first, then nervous. Olivia called out Mike's name, and I could hear him fumbling around, trying to find a flashlight. That's when I made my move. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open, stepping inside as quietly as possible. The room was pitch black, but I didn't need to see them. I could hear them. I could feel their fear growing with every passing second. Mike! Olivia's voice trembled, and I could hear her footsteps moving closer. I stayed silent. Mike finally found a flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on me. His face went pale, his voice catching in his throat. "David?" he stammered, his hands shaking as he held the flashlight. I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at them. Olivia grabbed his arm, whispering something I couldn't make out. They were scared now, truly scared. Good. I wanted them to feel it, to understand what it meant to have your world ripped out from under you. I took a step forward, and they backed away. "What are you doing here?" Mike asked, his voice cracking. Again, I said nothing. My silence was louder than any words could have been. Then I took out the bat. It was nothing fancy, just an old wooden bat I'd had for years. But in that moment, it felt like an extension of my anger, my pain, my need for justice. Mike tried to act tough, stepping in front of Olivia like he was going to protect her. But the moment I swung the bat, all his bravado disappeared. The first hit was for the lies, for every time he looked me in the eye and pretended to be my friend. He went down immediately, clutching his side, gasping for air. Olivia screamed, backing into the corner of the room. I didn't stop. The second hit was for the betrayal, the months they spent laughing behind my back. And the third was for me, for everything they had stolen from me. Mike was on the ground now, begging me to stop. "David, please," he cried, his voice thick with pain. But I wasn't listening. I turned to Olivia, who was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "You think this is over?" I said, my voice low and steady. "You think you can destroy someone and just walk away?" I didn't hit her. No, that wasn't part of the plan. I wanted her to watch, to see what her choices had led to. She had already lost everything she cared about. Her reputation, her relationships, her perfect little life. But this was the final nail in the coffin. I wanted her to remember this night every time she closed her eyes. When I was done, I left. I didn't wait for the police to arrive, didn't stick around to see what would happen next. That wasn't the point. The point was that they knew that I wasn't someone they could walk over, knew that actions have consequences. As I walked back into the woods, the sound of their cries echoing behind me, I felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. And maybe that was the real revenge. Not what I had done to them, but what they had done to me, turning me into someone I didn't even recognize. As I walked away that night, through the cold, silent woods, I tried to convince myself it was over, that I had done what I needed to do, that justice had been served. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. It never is. The next morning, I woke up to silence. The kind of silence that feels suffocating, like the air itself is holding its breath. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space where Olivia's things used to be. The apartment felt hollow, like a shell of what it once was. The memories were still there, etched into every corner, but now they felt distant, like echoes from another life. I checked my phone, expecting, I don't even know what. An apology? A confrontation? Something. But there was nothing. No calls, no messages. It was as if they had disappeared completely. Part of me was relieved. I didn't want to face them again. But another part of me, the part that still held on to the person I used to be, wanted closure, wanted answers. I got neither. What I did get, though, was news. It didn't take long for word to spread. Mike had been hospitalized. A broken rib, a concussion, bruises that would take weeks to heal. Olivia, well, she had left town, packed her things and vanished, like she was running from a ghost. Maybe she was. I thought that would bring me peace, knowing they were gone, knowing they couldn't hurt me anymore. But it didn't. The nights were the worst. I would lie awake for hours, replaying everything in my mind. The look on Mike's face when I swung the bat, the sound of Olivia's scream, the deafening silence after I left. It was like a loop I couldn't escape, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My friends noticed the change. They tried to reach out, to pull me back into the world, but I couldn't face them. How could I? How do you explain something like this? How do you tell people that you're not the person they thought you were, that you're not even the person you thought you were? And then came the questions. The police showed up at my door a few days later, not with handcuffs, but with questions. Were you at Mike's cabin that night? Do you know anything about what happened? I had prepared for this. I told them I hadn't seen Mike in weeks, that the last time we spoke was at a bar, that he seemed fine then. They didn't seem convinced, but they didn't have enough to press further. At least, not yet. It was a small victory, but it felt hollow. The truth was still there, hanging over me like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every knock on the door, every unknown number on my phone. It all felt like the beginning of the end. And yet, life went on. It's strange, isn't it? How the world keeps spinning, no matter how broken you feel inside. I went back to work, back to the routine, but everything felt muted. Colors weren't as bright, sounds weren't as sharp. It was like I was living in grayscale, detached from the life I used to know. I tried to convince myself that this was enough, that I had done what needed to be done, and now it was time to move forward. But the anger, the bitterness, it didn't go away. It just sat there, beneath the surface, simmering, waiting for something to ignite it again. And then, one day, it happened. I was at the grocery store, minding my own business, when I saw her. Olivia. She was standing in the aisle, looking at something on the shelf, completely unaware of my presence. My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought about turning around, about walking away and leaving her to her new life. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her go that easily. I walked up to her, my footsteps slow and deliberate. When she turned and saw me, her face went pale. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like she had seen a ghost. Finally, she whispered, "David." But I didn't let her finish. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with steel. "Why aren't you gone?" She stumbled over her words, trying to explain herself, but I didn't care. I didn't want explanations. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done, to understand that she couldn't just walk back into my world like nothing had happened. I told her to leave, to get out of town and never come back. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away without another word. That was the last time I saw her. Or Mike. I don't know where they are now, and honestly, I don't care. They're ghosts to me, faded memories of a life I no longer recognize. But their shadows still linger, haunting the edges of my mind, reminding me of what I lost, of what I became. People always say revenge doesn't bring peace, that it leaves you empty, hollow. They're right. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes that emptiness is better than the alternative. Sometimes it's better than the pain, because at least the emptiness is quiet. In the weeks and months that followed, I learned to live in that silence. It wasn't easy. Some days, it felt like I was carrying the weight of everything that had happened. Every word, every decision, every consequence. Other days, it felt like I wasn't carrying anything at all, like I was just floating through life, untethered and hollow. I stopped talking about it. To anyone. What was there to say? How do you explain something like this? How do you tell people that the person they thought they knew no longer exists? That you don't even recognize yourself in the mirror anymore? My friends drifted away, one by one. They didn't say anything, but I could feel it. The way they looked at me, the way their conversations grew shorter, their invitations less frequent. Maybe they didn't know how to handle what I had become. Or maybe they just didn't want to. I don't blame them. I wasn't exactly easy to be around. But life doesn't stop, does it? The world doesn't pause for you to catch up, to find your footing again. So, I did what I could to keep moving. I buried myself in work, in routines, in anything that didn't leave room for thoughts or feelings. It wasn't much of a life, but it was something. People always talk about closure, about finding peace after a loss. But I've learned that closure isn't something you find. It's something you create. It's a decision to let go of the things you can't change, to stop chasing answers you'll never get. And so, I let go. Olivia and Mike became memories. Faded, distant, almost unreal. I don't know where they are now. Maybe they stayed together. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they've moved on, rebuilt their lives, found new people to trust. But it doesn't matter. Their story ended the moment I walked away that night. Mine, however, is still being written. And that's what I've come to realize, that life isn't about the things you lose. It's about the things you choose to hold on to, the things you fight for, the things you rebuild. I've lost a lot, but I'm still here. And for now, that's enough. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you've felt the sting of betrayal, the pull of anger, the weight of revenge. Or maybe you're just curious, trying to understand how something like this could happen. Either way, I hope you've learned something from my story, not just about love and loss, but about yourself, about what you're capable of, and what you're willing to do when everything you thought you knew falls apart. Because at the end of the day, that's what life is, a series of choices. Some we're proud of, some we regret, and some we carry with us forever. I'll carry this forever. Not just what they did to me, but what I did to them. The choices I made, the person I became in the process. It's a part of me now, as much as the memories of who I used to be. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's how we grow. By facing the parts of ourselves we don't want to see, by accepting the things we can't change, and by finding a way to move forward anyway. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, and I'm sure it wasn't easy to hear. But if it's taught you anything, if it's helped you in any way, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe some good can come from all of this, after all. If you want to hear more stories like this, real and raw, don't forget to subscribe to Wild Love Story. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And if you've been through something like this, or if you just want to share your thoughts, leave a comment below. We're here to listen, to connect, and to remind each other that we're not alone. This has been Wild Love Story. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, the past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. We do.